Welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, a podcast for Lutheran schools and their leaders, about Lutheran schools and their leadership. This is hosted by two Lutheran school principals. My name is Rob Lunak, and I'm the principal at Mount Calvary Lutheran School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my co-host is Mike Sheeman.
My name is Mike Sheeman, and I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, Ohio. And it's kind of fun to be recording today. As we record, it's actually Maundy Thursday, so we're in the midst of Holy Week. And the topic we're going to be discussing today is standardized testing. And I love talking about testing in light of the gospel, and especially in this kind of a week, because I've often done devotions, or I've thought, what if God had a test for us that we had to pass? We would all fail. And so in the midst of the cross and in Holy Week and celebrating Jesus' death and his resurrection, what a joy it is to know that, there is a test at the end of life for all of us to pass, but Jesus did it for us. And the gospel message that you can actually tie, believe it or not, into standardized testing is kind of cool. And I just think it's fun to start by reflecting on that. You might not be listening to this on Maundy Thursday or Holy Week, but either way, it's a good reminder of the love that God has for us and our mission in our Lutheran schools.
Yeah, there's a good devotion that I'm sure can be written from that.
Okay.
And I am so glad that when God looks at me, he doesn't see me, he sees Jesus. That is much better, because I am not passing that test. Let me tell you, I guess if we were to put it on a letter scale, I have an F. That's just, I recognize that. I am a sinful human being, as we all are. So very, very grateful. Now, unfortunately, Jesus cannot take the standardized tests that you have to give at your school. And the state generally also doesn't accept Jesus as an answer on any of the fill in the blank. So they should, but unfortunately, they do not. And that's one of the things we're going to talk today about, is standardized testing and its place in schools and its purpose in your planning. And we are going to get into a little bit of a philosophical discussion as well about maybe its purpose. And let's actually kind of start there. So when I was a kid taking standardized tests, I hated that time. The only thing I liked is they gave me cinnamon gum. Every kid got a little stick of big red cinnamon gum before the test, because apparently it was supposed to make us just a little bit smarter. I was in one of those districts that was really kind of doing anything they could to juice their scores. Now, as an adult looking back on that, there's some research there. Research saying that if you choose cinnamon gum when you're studying and then choose cinnamon gum when you're test taking, you're more likely to remember the things you were studying. My school didn't do that part. They just gave us sticks of gum during the test. So they missed a little bit of that. But why do we do these tests at all? And Mike, why don't we start with you? What do you think the purpose is of our standardized testing?
So I've always been told, and I mean, I'm sure every single teacher in teacher training is told, standardized testing is to get a snapshot of a child's progress at that particular moment. Now, of course, testing can be used for a lot of different things, to be able to measure growth goals, to set goals, to do all those things. But in some cases, I think there's a lot of pressure when it comes to tests. You have kids that struggle to take tests. Some of these standardized tests are either in digital methods or bubble sheets that even little kids struggle with the method of taking the test. What if the dog just died? What if they didn't have breakfast? What if they're sick that day? There's no redos. You get this one snapshot in time. And so I think that there's a lot of pressure on those kids. Typically what I've done, and what I know our teachers here do, is we basically create a relaxed environment for the kids. And we say, this is an opportunity for you to show us the great things that God has been teaching you. And so this is an opportunity. Show us what you know. There's no pressure here. We would ask that you do your best, give it your absolute best shot. But this particular standardized test, and here how we do it at Bethany, the test scores themselves do not roll into any kind of report card or any kind of formative data that goes to parents. Now, parents can see the test scores. In our case, that's fine. But I think it's important for the kids to know this is a pressure-free environment. If there's something that you don't know, that's great. Then we know we get the chance to teach you that, and that makes us excited to do that. So it definitely measures that snapshot in time of that particular moment and of that particular day. Rob, would you agree with that? Would you see some similar patterns at your school?
Yeah, here in Wisconsin, so we have to take the Ford exam, and that is a series of state mandated standardized tests that everyone must take at the same time of the year, generally middle of March through middle of April. And it is just a snapshot, and it's something that we get the scores back later, and we can't even really use that to impact instruction during that school year. It's more of a, okay, well, this is our third grade score as a whole this year. What can we talk about for next year's third graders, right? So it's, I know why the state does it that way. It's accountability in Wisconsin. That's what it is. It is an accountability measure for our state report card in Wisconsin. If you're in the choice program, everybody gets a state report card. If you're a public school, everybody gets a state report card. Forward testing is a part of that report card. But we do the same thing. We tell the kids, hey, if you don't know something, that's okay. This is not going to impact your grade. This is not going to prevent you from passing. This is not something that we're gonna go, oh well, little Timmy didn't know this thing, so little Timmy can't go on the field trip. We're not doing any of that stuff. Just don't worry about it. If you don't know something, guess. No one's going to know if you guess. You're clicking bubbles on a computer screen, right? So at least try. That's all we can ask, and that's all we can really do with anything. You got to make sure you put in your best effort. And then reminding parents, hey, it's really important that your kid is here these weeks because we only can test in this window. We can't really do any makeups in May, so you got to be here for those things. And then the more helpful standardized test for us is really the MAP test. And we'll do MAP testing 3 times a year, and we will look at those scores because we get those the next day. You finish MAP testing, we can look at that the very next morning, and we will do that, and we will take those scores and we will look at the strands that it's given us, and we will tie those right into math and reading instruction for us and say, okay, it says that this kid needs these 5 skills to focus on. We're going to jump right into those on IXL or with our math book and use that to really drive instruction. But it's one of those things where I think cognitively we all understand why we do it. We all can come up with good reasons why we do it. But I wonder a little bit if it's just one of those things that it's really easy to measure. So we do it because it's easy to measure. And I wonder if maybe there's better ways sometimes that we spend so much time and energy and effort on standardized testing. What do you think, Mike?
I'm with you. I think that we know that not all kids learn in the same way, and not all kids can express their knowledge in the same way. Rob, I think that the standardized testing is as useful as the teachers who use it to inform their instruction. Now, my guess is that when you get your data, you're going to see, if you take a look at it, you're going to have kids that are either at grade level, above grade level, or below grade level. So when you look at that, and you see this in your classroom as a teacher, I think that could actually be somewhat overwhelming to say, how do I work to meet all of these needs in my learners when we know that it's such a vast array of kids and where they fit on the spectrum? So it can be really a challenge to look at that and to see all that kind of stuff. But what I would encourage administration to look at is, how can you equip your teachers to be able to meet those various learning needs? Now, at a later time, I think we need to do a podcast on something called proficiency-based learning. There's a whole thought process out there about how kids are basically put into factory models of what determines what grade you're in, your age, not what you know and not your demonstration of knowing it, but simply your age. Now, that's kind of an old school model of learning where what do you do with a kid who in 5th grade is in the 99th percentile of math instruction and is going to sit there in your class and know everything that you've taught? I mean, and for real, be able to potentially even take an exam and ace the exam before you've taught it. That kid ultimately is going to turn into a behavioral problem because they're bored. So how can you use this as an administrator to look at school-wide trends to see where you're excelling, and how do you maybe shift the paradigm a little bit in your school to meet kids where they're at, rather than fall into the factory model of they are in this grade because they're this many years old. So different testing data, as Rob said, is going to give you different results. So we have to do various Ohio State tests here, and we don't get those results until later on. But the MAP testing is stuff that we can look at almost in real time. And so it is good practice to review that. As an administrator, I think it's also good practice for you to look at the overall view of your school, because maybe you'll see that there is a difficulty in a particular subject area, and you could help your teachers out with that. The tricky balance is you don't want your teachers to think that they're failing or that you're going to be staring them down because they have a low math score. The other thing that I know sometimes some schools have to discuss is merit-based pay, that the kids have to do well on their tests in order for the teachers to get their salary increases. I've never gone for that personally. I think there's reasons some schools do, reasons some schools don't. But again, that adds to another pressure level of these tests. So there's pressure for the kids, but let's be real, there's pressure for the teachers. And then if you want to step it up, there's also arguably pressure for the school. I don't know. Do you see those as pressure points too, Rob? Did I miss any that you see?
Yeah, I think you got him there. There is some pressure from parents because parents will put a lot of stock into those too because it's the one measure they'll get that compares their kid against the country generally or the other kids in their state. And parents put a lot of stock in that number a lot of the time. And that's something that I always encourage parents to not do because, and I'll tell this to teachers as well. Has there ever been a kid on a standardized test whose result surprised you so much that you were willing to change everything about what you were teaching? And the answer is usually, well, no. If a kid is behind in my class, I know that before standardized test tells me that. If my kid is in the 99th percentile in math, I as a parent already know my kid's good at math. You as a teacher already know my kid's good at math. So it's one of those, if you're going to, it's like a live by the sword, die by the sword thing, but with data. If you're going to live by the data, you got to die by the data. So if you're going to say, oh, look how great our scores are, you then can't hand wave away poor scores and go, oh, our kids didn't test good this day, or we had this thing going on. You liked your good ones. You got to deal with your bad ones. And there is pressure that I think we put into it. And I think that if I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, which I'm going to, so here I go with a broad brush, I think we've put too much stock into standardized test scores across the board. And I think some of that is because we've depersonalized education because of the factory model that we have. And I did put that proficiency-based learning thing. We will have to have an episode about that. And sidebar, if you are at a Lutheran school with merit-based pay, please contact me. I have so many questions, and I actually want you on an episode of the podcast because I would love to talk to you about what that is and how that works for you. Because I can't imagine being in a Lutheran school and pulling aside the fourth grade teacher and be like, hey, you didn't hit your targets this quarter. We're going to have to dock your pay. I can't. I just can't. I can't see it. I can't see it. Okay. So we've done the test. You've sat down and you've looked at all of it. How do you do a deep dive into that data with your teachers, with your staff, with your families, with your students? What does that look like for you guys, Mike?
Well, I'm actually going to back it up even one step further. So don't let me forget the deep dive question. How do we do it? Because I want to hit that too. But I want to even talk about, should we be giving test scores to parents? I'm going to give two different perspectives on that based on two schools where I've served. So I served in one school. We did standardized testing with the kids. And we did not release the standardized test score to the parents. And the rationale for that was that these scores are for the use by the teachers, and they are used by the teachers to inform instruction. And then the parents get the report card, and that has the teachers in not only a teacher's interpretation of the test scores, but it has the additional work that the kid has done from that test to get to the point where this is where they are today. And plus, if you look at, say, MAP data as a specific point, parents don't understand percentile ranking numbers. Parents don't get any type of Lexile scores. There's not a lot of understanding out there in the general parent community. So the amount of translation that it took to get that score into the head of the parents, oh gosh, my kid's at the 65th percentile, they're not the 90th percentile. No, well, what's your goal? What's mastery? What are you working toward? So there's a lot of misunderstanding on the end of the parents. But then I've been in schools where we do give them out, but when we give them out, we do have a little bit of that explanation. A lot of times the parents do with the test scores what they do with the newsletter. They just glance and out it goes. Like, oh, okay, cool, you did your test. So whatever you do, just make sure that you are equipping the parents to be able to understand what it is that they're receiving. And then how do you explain, is for your school, is somebody higher than the 50th percentile successful? Is somebody lower than the 50th percentile a failure? You just need to be ready to have those conversations, because we don't want the parents labeling the kids either, or overreacting to those test scores. But how do you do the deep dive? We've done this in a few different ways in various schools where I've served too, where one was we printed out all of the various test data. We had it all on the tables around the cafeteria spread out. We just kind of went, and I said to the staff, what we're going to do, we're just going to take an hour here, and I want you to go, and I want you to sit with one another, look at the scores, and tell me what do you notice? And it was very open-ended like that, just simply, what do you notice? And they picked up on things that I hadn't even picked up on. It was kind of neat to see some of the trends that they noticed, or the specific points that they picked on. And we just had really good conversation, but it led into things like, is our social studies resource accomplishing what it is that we're trying to have it accomplish? I will say that there's a really big misunderstanding out there between curriculum and resources. People will say all the time, we bought a new curriculum for science. Well, no, you didn't. You bought a new book. The curriculum are the standards that you teach, and typically those don't change very much over time. So when you're looking at, hey, we're struggling, well, the standards are going to be the standards. If your kids are struggling, or if they're not getting the material, absolutely, you can have a conversation around the resources that you're using. And so this could be a jumping off point to that. So standardized testing is really the diving board to jump into the pool of a lot broader, of many, many more broad topics. Would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I will say, if you are a principal who is introducing reviewing this data for the first time, and maybe your staff hasn't done this before, your school hasn't traditionally done this before, people will sometimes look at their scores, and if they're not matching the scores of the person next to them, or they're not matching the scores of where they think their kids are, people get really defensive really quickly with that. So just know that when you put that out there, be like, hey, this isn't a judgment. This is just math. These are just numbers. Data doesn't have a pulse. It should elicit no emotional response from you, because it is not an emotional thing. These are just numbers on a page. And if those don't match up with the results we're seeing, then the question is, why? If we can prove in other ways that our kids are successful, then does this number matter at all? No, it's a number. Now, if that number is just another piece of data that is supporting a conclusion that maybe you're not where you should be, well, then you got to work with that. But that doesn't mean you're a bad teacher. It doesn't mean that you're not doing your job. It means that there's improvement to be had, which we all know this. We all want to improve. We all can improve. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's the same tact we take with our kids, and that's the same thing we want them to know. So we as teachers really got to take that on first. We would never want a kid to get a poor grade on a test and go, well, I'm never testing again. These tests are unfair. This is terrible. I'm just a bad person. We go, no. It's a test. That's all it is. And we can learn on all those things. And we got to be able to take that same view as well. But that doesn't mean that we ignore any of those results if they're uncomfortable. We still got to look at them. And I like the idea of laying everything out. We've done that before. I've printed all of them out and I've handed them out. What do you guys think? And what can we take that's great? What can we take that we can grow from? And that's, you got to have both of those. And those are things that you can even use later on down the road, because those test scores should not go in a file and go away. That's not helpful. If you're just going to put it in the kids folder at the end of the year, don't even bother. If you are a school that's taking the Stanford 10 right now and no one's telling you you have to, or the Iowa Basic or whatever it is, no one's telling you you have to do that, and you're not doing anything with it, I would argue you have two choices in front of you. One, start looking at the data and use it, or two, stop spending the money on the test.
Exactly.
I would not take it if I wasn't going to use it. You're wasting your very finite Lutheran school budget if you're not using that information. I'll say that. Now, there are data decisions that you'll need to make that'll take this, like if a kid's getting evaluated for an IEP, they'll want to look at those standardized test scores because they are normed and because that gives everybody a very fair comparison to other kids in that age range. And you can even take that and you can use that, if the scores are really great, to market your school. You want to talk about that, Mike?
Yeah, you absolutely can. I think with marketing and test scores, it's one thing to say, hey, look, our kids are performing really, really well. The caution that I would have with that is, and we talked about this briefly earlier, what happens when they're not performing really, really well? Because you might have old marketing or something that says you're in this percentile or ranking of whatever, or you're, even is it blue ribbon schools? I'm not totally familiar with all of that. But what I would say is that I think you can simply say that we look at every student individually, and that's our strength as a Lutheran school. And so when we take a look at the test scores, we have students, and I'll be open with parents on a tour. We have students that do great, and we have students that do not do great. But for either way, it allows me to know where they're at, so I can provide individualized instruction. So I really use the standardized testing part of the tour to dive into differentiation, because that allows me to not just support the struggling learners, but it allows me to challenge the advanced learners. And so if you talk about that, a parent's going to know that wherever their kid falls on that testing spectrum, they are going to receive instruction. And what's our goal for every single student at this school? Progress. What's our goal? Moving forward. We're not going to say your kid is going to be a lawyer by the time they're done 8th grade and they'll have completed all their high school courses. No, they might have the ability to do that. However, our goal is to meet them where they're at and to move them forward. And that's typically what we found that parents want.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it, because you can take your data, no matter what it is, and then you can use that to further the purpose of your school. I really like the way you phrase that. I will be stealing that for sure.
Steal away.
One of the last questions I will pose to everyone listening is, if you have a kid who tests, let's say you're map testing, and he tests so far ahead of everyone else, and you look at the deep dives information Mapped gives you, and it says, okay, this kid understands fractions. Do you skip fractions for that kid when you teach math? Yes or no? And that's an answer I can't give you. I would say that if you have that information and you know that kid could be doing more and you have the resources to make that happen, I think that's a pretty easy yes, go do that. But I also recognize that not a lot of our Lutheran schools are set up to be able to differentiate to such a degree. I know we can a little bit, and I know teachers are great about that, but there's a level there where all of a sudden, okay, I can't skip the entire fraction lesson. Everyone else needs to know it. This one kid's ahead. What do we do? But that is a great problem to have, actually. And I would argue that we have plenty of Lutheran schools that have that problem. And so maybe I think there's even a podcast episode in here about differentiation we can talk about later.
Yep. And that ties right into the proficiency-based learning I think we need to talk about too.
Perfect.
So
I think that we, as with any standardized testing, I think we may have we filled out all the bubbles on this one. So any closing words, Mike?
no, well said. I think that's something to consider. How is it that you look at your kids to provide the best level of instruction and to move them forward? And standardized testing is a tool. We probably touched on some things that are maybe hot button or big topic ideas for certain people that agree with one side or the other. But again, I hope that our conversation today just prompted you to think more about how are you going to use this tool in your school. Rob, any last thoughts? And then I'd be happy to close in prayer.
Yeah, we have a lot of opinions on this podcast, but there are opinions, and it's our podcast. So if you have a different opinion, we still want to hear from you. Let us know. There's more discussion to be had, and that's what this is meant to be. A tool and a resource, and just get everybody thinking and talking about kind of the great things we're doing in our Lutheran schools.
So let's close off with prayer. Let's go to God. Heavenly Father, we thank you that the greatest test of all, that the test that gets us into heaven is a test that's done. And God, we thank you that Jesus has given us his A+, that we could not have earned that, God, but what a gift it is that we've received. Lord, as we think about all of the students who are in our Lutheran schools and all those who serve, we pray a blessing upon them. Testing itself creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of nerves, but God, we know that you are with us for everything that we face. You're beside the sides of our students, that you are with them. And I ask that you would bless all of those who teach and all of those who learn, that they would come to learn about the mysteries of the world that you've created, and most importantly, to learn about you. Lord, I lift up all those who are listening and all those who are serving. Pray that you would bless them in their ministries, giving them your strength through your wisdom that we find in your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.